There's a pattern in American history that nobody talks about. A pattern so consistent, so predictable, that once you see it, you'll never look at the dollar in your wallet the same way again. America has never maintained the same monetary system for more than 60 to 80 years. Not once, not ever. Every single time, without exception, the system eventually collapses, gets replaced, and the cycle starts again. And here's the kicker. Each change comes from crisis, not careful planning. War, panic, hyperinflation, bank runs, economic collapse. That's when America changes its money. Continental Currency lasted 6 years before collapsing into worthlessness. The first bank of the United States lasted 20 years. The second bank lasted 20 years. Free banking chaos lasted 26 years. The national banking system lasted 50 years. The Federal Reserve with gold backing lasted 58 years. And our current system, pure fiat currency with no gold backing, started in 1971. That was 54 years ago. We're approaching the historical average lifespan of American monetary systems, which means, based on every pattern in American history, we might be entering a period of vulnerability, a period where crisis could force another change. So let me take you through every time America changed its money, because understanding this pattern isn't just interesting history, it might be the key to understanding what's coming next. Hey, I'm Brandon, and welcome back to My Money Mint, the channel where I dive into topics related to money and wealth. All right, let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning. 1775, the Revolutionary War. The Continental Congress needed to finance a war against the most powerful empire on earth, but they had no power to tax. So they did what desperate governments always do. They printed money. They called it Continental Currency. In 1775, they printed $6 million. By the end of 1779, they'd printed $241.5 million. Think about that. They increased the money supply by 40 times in just 4 years. And this wasn't backed by gold or silver. It was backed solely by the promise of future tax revenues. Promises that nobody believed. The inflation was catastrophic. By the end of 1776, the continental dollar traded at a 30% discount to silver. By the end of 1777, a 70% discount. By the end of 1779, $1 in paper money was worth only 1 or 2 cents in silver. By 1780, you needed over 100 continental dollars to buy what 1 silver dollar could buy. By 1781, when the war ended, the exchange rate was 100 to 1. Continental dollars eventually fell to 1,000 to 1, effectively worthless. George Washington said it best. A wagon load of currency will hardly purchase a wagon load of provisions. But it gets worse. The states were issuing their own paper money, adding to the inflation beyond what Congress was printing. And the British were running counterfeiting operations to deliberately destroy confidence in American currency. By war's end, only a few counterfeiters had been caught and hanged. Congress tried everything. They passed stringent price control laws. They compelled creditors and merchants to accept Continentals on par with gold and silver. None of it worked. You can't legislate value into worthless paper. The phrase, "not worth a Continental," entered American vocabulary. It's still used today, over 240 years later, meaning something completely worthless. That's the legacy of America's first monetary experiment. The Founding Fathers learned their lesson. When they drafted the Constitution in 1787, they included a specific clause, Article 1, Section 10, stating that no state could make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. The painful experience of runaway inflation was so traumatic that they wrote hard money into the Constitution itself. But America still needed banks. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton established the first Bank of the United States, a central bank modeled on the Bank of England. It lasted exactly 20 years. In 1811, Congress failed to renew its charter by just one vote. in both the Senate and House. Why? Because Jeffersonian Democrats feared centralized financial power. They believed banks served northern industrial interests at the expense of southern agriculture. Without a central bank, financing the War of 1812 was a disaster. So in 1816, Congress created the Second Bank of the United States. This one lasted 20 years. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson vetoed its recharter. Jackson hated the Second Bank. He saw it as corrupt, elitist, and unconstitutional. By 1836, it was dead. Jackson's destruction of the Second Bank was a defining political issue of the 1830s. It shaped the entire second party system, Democrats opposing banks, Whigs supporting them. But killing the Second Bank didn't solve America's monetary problems. It created new ones. Welcome to the free banking era, 1837 to 1863, possibly the most chaotic period in American monetary history. After the Second Bank closed, all banks were chartered by states. This resulted in a proliferation of banks. Each bank issued its own banknotes against deposits of gold and silver. Sounds reasonable, right? Except it was chaos. Issuing paper currency wasn't limited to banks. Drugstores issued notes. Railroad companies issued notes. Insurance companies issued notes. The notes were all different sizes and colors. They did not trade one for one. Their value depended on the size and reputation of the issuing institution. And here's where it gets insane. Approximately 1/3 of all paper currency during this period was counterfeit. Forgers had a field day. Merchants had to carry thick books called counterfeit detectors just to figure out if a note was real and what it was worth. Then you had wildcat banks. Banks chartered under state law that distributed nearly worthless currency backed by questionable security. They set up offices in remote locations where only the wildcats would dare to tread, deliberately making it difficult to redeem notes for gold or silver. The term wildcat came from the perception that these banks were as unpredictable and elusive as wild cats on the frontier. Michigan had one of the most disastrous experiences. In early 1837, the state legislature passed a free banking law to encourage banking. By the end of 1839, most free banks had failed, and the public was left with worthless banknotes. The absence of national regulation led to extreme booms and busts and a high frequency of bank failures during the panics of 1837 and 1857. The Civil War forced change. The Union needed to finance the war, and the chaotic state banking system couldn't do it. So Congress passed the National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864. These created nationally chartered banks and a uniform national currency. Congress also printed $450 million in greenbacks, paper money to finance the war. The national banking system lasted about 50 years, longer than previous systems but still subject to periodic crises. Without a central bank, there was no lender of last resort. When panic hit, banks failed in cascades. The Panic of 1873, the Panic of 1893, and worst of all, the Panic of 1907. I've covered the Panic of 1907 in detail in another video, but here's the short version. In October 1907, the entire American financial system nearly collapsed. Banks were failing. The stock exchange almost closed. Interest rates hit 150%. The fate of the economy rested on one man, J.P. Morgan, a 70-year-old banker who spent 3 weeks organizing rescues, forcing other banks to contribute, literally locking bankers in his library until they signed agreements to save failing institutions. Morgan saved the system, but America decided it could never again depend on one private citizen to rescue the economy. That realization led directly to the Federal Reserve Act. Signed into law on December 23, 1913, the Federal Reserve was supposed to prevent panics by serving as a lender of last resort. It could create money in emergencies. It could stabilize the banking system. And for a while, it worked. Sort of. But the Fed was still constrained by the gold standard. Every dollar had to be backed by gold reserves. Then came World War I. Wars are expensive. The Fed expanded the money supply to help finance the war. After the war, the 1920s saw massive credit expansion. Stock market speculation reached insane levels. And in October 1929, the bubble burst. The Great Depression was the worst economic collapse in American history. Banks failed by the thousands. Unemployment hit 25%, GDP contracted by 30%, and the Federal Reserve, which was supposed to prevent such disasters, either couldn't or wouldn't do enough to stop it. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt made a radical move. Executive Order 6102 made it illegal for American citizens to own gold. You had to turn in your gold coins, bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1st, 1933. If you didn't, 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, equivalent to $230,000 today. The government paid $20.67 per troy ounce for the gold. Then, after collecting it all, Roosevelt revalued gold to $35 per ounce. Overnight devaluation of 69%. The government effectively stole 69% of the value from every gold holder in America. Why did Roosevelt do this? The official reason was to fight deflation and reflate the economy. The real reason? The government was broke. Confiscating gold and devaluing the dollar was a way to reduce the real value of government debt and expand the money supply without the constraints of the gold standard. This created a hybrid system. Foreign governments could still redeem dollars for gold at $35 per ounce, but American citizens couldn't own gold. This system got formalized after World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce and other currencies pegged to the dollar. Bretton Woods lasted from 1944 to 1971, 27 years. Why did it collapse? Vietnam War. President Lyndon Johnson's guns and butter policy, fighting a war while expanding domestic spending, required massive money printing. Inflation accelerated. Foreign governments started doubting America's ability to maintain gold convertibility at $35 per ounce. By the late 1960s, foreign central banks were redeeming dollars for gold at an accelerating pace. America's gold reserves were being drained. France, under Charles de Gaulle, was particularly aggressive, literally sending battleships to New York to collect gold and transport it back to Paris. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. He was temporarily closing the gold window. Foreign governments could no longer redeem dollars for gold. The temporary measure became permanent. The dollar's link to gold was severed forever. This created the system we have today, pure fiat currency. The dollar isn't backed by gold, silver, or anything tangible. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, which really means it's backed by the government's ability to tax and the military's ability to enforce the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Since 1971, the money supply has exploded. In 1971, the M2 money supply was about $600 billion. Today, over $21 trillion. That's a 35-fold increase in 54 years. The purchasing power of the dollar has declined by over 85% since 1971. Now let me show you the pattern. Look at the duration of each monetary system. Continental currency lasted 6 years before collapsing. The period with no central bank under the Articles of Confederation lasted 28 years. The first bank lasted 20 years. The second bank lasted 20 years. Free banking lasted 26 years. The national banking system lasted 50 years. The Federal Reserve with gold backing lasted 58 years. Our current system, pure fiat since 1971, has lasted 54 years. We're approaching the historical average. No American monetary system has ever lasted more than 60 to 80 years. We're in the danger zone. And look at how each change happened. Continental currency collapsed from hyperinflation during war. The second bank was killed by political conflict. Free banking chaos led to the National Banking Acts during the Civil War. The Panic of 1907 led to the Federal Reserve. The Great Depression led to gold confiscation. Vietnam War costs led to Nixon closing the gold window. Every single change came from crisis. War, panic, hyperinflation, bank runs, political upheaval. Never from careful planning, never from gradual reform. Always from desperation. There's another pattern, the hard money/soft money cycle. America oscillates between attempts at sound money and inflationary expedients. The Constitution mandated gold and silver. That was hard money. Then came the War of 1812, state bank chaos, soft money. The second bank was an attempt at hard money. Free banking was soft money chaos. The National Banking Acts tried for hard money. The Fed initially maintained some gold discipline. Then FDR confiscated gold. Bretton Woods was semi-hard money. Nixon made it pure soft money in 1971. We're now 54 years into the longest period of pure fiat money in American history. No gold backing, no silver backing, nothing constraining money creation except political will, which history shows is never enough. So what does this mean for you? It means the current system is likely approaching the end of its lifespan. Based on historical patterns, something will eventually force a change. Maybe it's a debt crisis. The U.S. national debt is now over $36 trillion. Maybe it's inflation spiraling out of control again. Maybe it's loss of confidence in the dollar as the reserve currency. Maybe it's a war that requires massive money printing. Maybe it's something we can't even predict yet. History doesn't tell us when the change will come or exactly what will trigger it. But it does tell us that change is coming. Every monetary system in American history has eventually failed and been replaced. Ours will be no exception. The question isn't if the current system will change. The question is when and what comes next. Will we return to some form of hard money, gold, silver, or perhaps Bitcoin? Will we move to a central bank digital currency giving the government even more control? Will we see hyperinflation destroy the dollar's value, like the Continental? Will we see a new Bretton Woods style agreement restructuring the international monetary system? Nobody knows, but understanding the pattern helps you prepare. Because the one constant in American monetary history is that when crisis comes, the people who saw it coming and prepared will survive. Those who didn't will lose everything, just like Continental dollar holders in 1781, just like wildcat banknote holders in 1839, just like gold owners in 1933. The pattern is clear. America changes its money every 60 to 80 years. Always during crisis. Never by choice. We're 54 years into the current system. The clock is ticking. Thank you for watching My Money Mint. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend. As you see, I've changed up the look with this video. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks again, everyone.